At 0700 hours, the sun hit the tarmac at Black Ridge Air Force Base with the kind of harsh clarity that made every surface gleam like steel. Pilots gathered outside Hangar 4 for the morning inspection, the air thick with jet fuel and routine. Linda Carter, silver-haired and stone-faced, moved through the F-16 pre-flight checklist like she had done 1,000 times before. She barely flinched when the voice came. Morning. Granny Flyboy. The words floated out from Captain Jake Montgomery's smirk loud enough for the younger crew to catch. A few snickers followed, but mostly it was silence. Linda didn't look up. She reached under the wing, tapping her gloved hand against the landing gear, like it was the only thing that mattered. Lieutenant Sean Blake leaned in with a laugh that didn't quite land. "You sure you can still read the gauges without your bifocals? Maybe we can get you a booster seat while we're at it." The crowd of enlisted techs shifted their weight uncomfortably. They had seen her fly through sandstorms and land jets after engine failure, but no one said a word. Jake stood tall, arms crossed, proud of his punchlines. Linda stood slowly, clipped the checklist to the clipboard, and faced the aircraft again. Her hands were steady, her mouth tight, but the flicker in her eyes was not defeat. Something passed through her expression. Cold calculation, like a switch had flipped deep beneath the surface. Nobody noticed when Colonel Bryant stepped out from the shadows of the control tower, watching the scene unfold with a sharp, unreadable gaze. Jake turned to pose for Blake's camera, unaware that by morning's end, he would no longer be in charge. Part 1. Introducing Linda Carter. Linda Carter never liked drawing attention. Her days started before dawn in a small beige house just outside the perimeter fence of Black Ridge Air Force Base. The kitchen smelled like old coffee grounds, and the walls were lined with faded photos of jet-smiling cadets and one framed wedding picture where both bride and groom wore flight suits. She had been a pilot for over 3 decades, not the kind that showed up in recruitment posters, but the kind that stayed after the crowd left logging hours in brutal heat, snow, or silence. Her husband Tom had been her partner in the sky and on the ground until a routine training mission went wrong 15 years earlier. Linda never remarried. People said she threw herself into the job afterward, but the truth was, she never really left it. Her daughter Emily called every Sunday, always asking if maybe this year she'd retire, maybe spend more time with the grandkids. Linda always answered the same way. "When it's time, I'll know." She still drove a 10-year-old truck with sand in the floorboards. She still packed her lunch. She still pressed her own uniforms neat and regulation perfect. The other officers joked that she'd welded her boots to her feet, and they weren't entirely wrong. But there was something about Linda that no one could joke away. She had presence, a calm that didn't need noise to command respect. When she entered a room, even the loudest voices dropped half a decibel. When she flew, control towers got real quiet. Her hands moved like memory. She could disassemble an altimeter blindfolded and once brought a smoking F-15 home on nothing but glide and grit. She never bragged, never posted her medals. Most of them stayed in a drawer next to Tom's flight log, which she still opened sometimes when the house got too still. Pilots younger than her had already retired with pension and fanfare. Linda didn't care for that. She wasn't flying for glory anymore. She flew because the sky still made sense even when the world on the ground didn't. What made Linda different wasn't just her hours in the cockpit. It was her patience. The way she listened before speaking. The way she waited, measured, and moved only when she was ready. That kind of power didn't shout. It just watched and outlasted. Even those who tried to sideline her couldn't find a crack. Her records were spotless. Her physicals were clean. Her reflexes tested better than most pilots 20 years younger. But that didn't stop the whispers or the slow crawl of new rules clearly meant to push her out. Linda never complained. She showed up early, did her job better than expected, and went home without fuss. But those who looked closely could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just working. She was watching. She was waiting. For someone like her, dignity wasn't a word. It was a posture, a way of being. The truth was, Linda Carter had already proven herself years ago. She just never stopped showing up. Part 2. Setting the Stage Power and Prejudice. Subpart 2.1. The New Commander. Captain Jake Montgomery arrived at Black Ridge like he was stepping onto a soundstage. His uniform fit too perfectly. His handshake was calibrated for cameras, and his grin seemed designed for press photos rather than pilots. At 32, he was the youngest commander the squadron had seen in over a decade, and everyone knew his father's name before they even met him. General Samuel Montgomery was a legend in the Pentagon circles, known more for his connections than his combat record. Jake carried that legacy like a badge, using it to open doors others had to break through. His record looked clean, but under the shine it was padded with hand-picked assignments and fast-track promotions. From the beginning, Jake spoke the language of modernization. He talked about digital upgrades, tighter standards, a leaner, younger squadron. But beneath the polished briefings and leadership jargon, his moves said something else. Older officers, especially those without social media profiles or tech buzzwords on their resumes, were suddenly being reassigned or reviewed. Lieutenant Sean Blake was his shadow, 27, ambitious and more concerned with algorithm reach than airspeed. He followed Jake like a camera crew, often with an actual phone in hand, capturing moments for what he called transparency, but felt more like self-promotion. Between them, a new culture started to take root. Image over substance, performance over depth. Regulations changed quickly. Mandatory monthly medical screenings for anyone over 55. Digital readiness reports that graded pilots on tech familiarity rather than flight instinct. Uniform inspections ramped up, targeting wrinkles and fits instead of function. The message was clear, even if it wasn't printed in bold. If you didn't fit the new mold, you weren't welcome. Linda noticed it all. So did a few others, though most kept their heads down. Jake never said anything directly offensive. That was the trick. He played polite, let Sean do the dirty work, and when things got tense, he smiled and talked about efficiency. The real shift happened during morning briefings. The room used to run on rank and experience. Now it ran on noise and momentum. Jake made sure the oldest voices got cut off mid-thought, and Sean's quick jabs disguised as jokes always landed on those slowest to respond. Every move was dressed up in policy, but the intention bled through. Linda wasn't the only one being pushed. Two others, both in their 40s, were reassigned to desk work within weeks of Jake's arrival. The younger pilots watched and learned fast. Keep up with the vibe or get left behind. Jake didn't just want a new squadron. He wanted a younger, flashier version of what a fighting force should look like. One that played well on screens and looked good on a resume. In that world, someone like Linda, quiet, experienced, grounded, wasn't a resource. She was a problem waiting to be retired. He never said it out loud, but the intent hung in every meeting. This wasn't about safety or readiness. It was about image. And slowly under his command, the difference between authority and arrogance began to blur. Subpart 2.2, the subtle attacks. The first policy came with a smile and a memo. All flight personnel over 55 would now be required to undergo monthly medical evaluations. Jake said it was about readiness, about safety, about making sure the force stayed sharp, but everyone knew Linda was the only one it applied to. The second change hit a week later. Uniform inspections became a daily routine, with Sean Blake walking the hangars like a fashion cop, clipboard in hand and a camera always ready. He made comments in front of crowds, not cruel exactly, but sharp enough to sting. Too much slack in a sleeve. A hemline not quite regulation. He always looked at Linda when he said it, even when he didn't say her name. Then came the tech audits. Each pilot had to complete a digital systems test designed for recent academy graduates. Linda passed it quietly and without fanfare, but her results were questioned anyway. Sean hinted at irregularities, hinted that maybe someone helped her. No one believed it, but no one spoke up. Around the base, the mood shifted. People avoided eye contact. Conversations grew shorter. The younger officers watched Jake and Sean closely, unsure whether to fall in line or look away. The older ones mostly kept their heads down. Everyone felt the rules changing, but the lines were drawn in sand, not ink. Linda never fought it. She followed every new regulation to the letter. Showed up early for medicals, stood still for uniform checks, completed every tech course without complaint. But she didn't hide the truth in her eyes. She knew what was happening, and they knew she knew. It wasn't about health or safety or standards. It was about control, about pushing someone out without having to say the words. Linda endured it all with a stillness that made the whole thing feel even crueler. Quiet defiance wrapped in grace. Part 3. The conflict erupts. Part 3.1. The breaking point. The briefing room was packed, not because anyone expected anything important, but because word had gotten around that something was about to happen. Jake stood at the front with a tablet in hand, voice loud and official eyes flicking toward Linda as he read off a list of performance metrics and procedural violations. He made it sound like standard protocol, but every sentence tightened like a noose, designed not to inform, but to corner. Sean Blake stood beside him, recording everything. He didn't even try to hide it. The lens swept across the room, capturing the faces of pilots and techs as Jake announced that Lieutenant Colonel Linda Carter was being grounded pending a formal review of fitness and competency. There was no gasp, just silence. A heavy, stunned silence that made the air feel like it weighed 100 pounds. Then came the final order. Jake stated that for reasons of regulation and optics, Linda would need to surrender her flight suit and all identifying insignia immediately. It was phrased as a necessity, a matter of protocol, but everyone understood what it really was: a performance. Linda didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She stepped forward and reached up to the first patch on her sleeve. Her fingers moved slowly, unfastening the Velcro with a steady pull. The sound cut through the silence like tearing paper in church. Her name tag came off next, followed by the squadron insignia, the American flag, the wings she'd earned decades ago. She folded each piece with precision. No dramatics, no hesitation, just clean, practiced motion like she was still in control of the moment. She placed them on the edge of the metal table one by one, as if returning borrowed honor to men who hadn't earned it. Jake didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The spectacle said everything. Sean zoomed in with his phone. His smirk stayed frozen, but something flickered behind it. Maybe discomfort, maybe doubt. Either way, he kept recording. Linda stood in her undershirt and regulation pants, still composed, still grounded. Her boots didn't move. Her back didn't bend. She didn't look at Jake. She looked at the room, not pleading, not angry, just looking, as if memorizing every face in case it mattered later. No one moved. A few looked down. One tech shifted his weight like he might step forward, then stopped. It wasn't fear that held them back. It was shame. The kind that grows when silence feels safer than truth. After a long pause, Linda spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room. If this is what you think leadership looks like, then wear it well. She turned and walked out without waiting for permission. Her footsteps echoed behind her, slow and even. No one followed, but no one forgot. Sub Part 3.2. The Calm After. The diner sat on the edge of town, the kind of place where the neon buzzed even when the sign was off and the coffee never quite lost its burn. Linda slid into a booth near the back, nodding once at the waitress who already knew not to bring a menu. Across from her sat Colonel Adrienne Moss, an old flight partner turned base intelligence officer, hair pulled tight and eyes sharper than ever. They didn't talk right away. The silence felt like a warm coat instead of a wall. Adrienne stirred her coffee, watching Linda carefully. After a few minutes, she said what had been hanging in the air since they sat down. "That was brutal, Lynn. You okay?" Linda didn't flinch. She reached for the sugar, poured one packet, stirred slowly. "I've seen worse." Adrienne leaned in slightly, her voice lower now. "You planning to let that stand?" Linda's gaze didn't lift. Instead, she looked past the window out to the empty lot, then back down to her cup. Sometimes it's better to let them think they've won. Gives you room to move. Adrienne tilted her head. "You're moving." Then Linda didn't answer. She set the spoon down, reached into her jacket, and slid a small sealed envelope across the table. Inside was a time, a place, and nothing else. Adrienne read it, then raised an eyebrow. "Thursday, huh?" Linda smiled, soft, but certain. "Make sure the cameras are working. Every single one." They sat a while longer, letting the quiet settle again. When the check came, Linda paid it without a word. She stood first, adjusted her coat, and looked down at Adrienne with the calm of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "You'll want a good seat for this one." Then she left, walking into the dark, like she had somewhere very specific to be. Part 4. The Reveal and the Reversal. Subpart 4.1. The Classified Mission. The air was crisp that morning, the kind of dry Nevada chill that made breath visible and everything feel sharper. Hangar 9 had been cleared out, the runway marked for a private demonstration that nobody knew much about. Pilots gathered in groups, arms crossed, eyes squinting at the horizon as General Morrison gave vague instructions to stay alert and observe. Jake stood near the front with Sean close behind, both in full dress, both visibly annoyed. No one had told them who authorized the event, and that alone was enough to bruise Jake's pride. He muttered something about wasted time, but his voice got lost in the low hum rising from the west. Then the sound changed. A whine built from nothing, thin and eerie at first, then growing into a roar unlike any jet they'd heard before. All heads turned, eyes narrowed. A dark shape shot over the ridge, low and fast, cutting through the sky like it was slicing it open. It wasn't any aircraft they recognized. Sleek, angular, its body shimmered in the sun like it didn't belong to this world. The jet rolled into a climb that defied gravity, spiraled into a hover, then dropped into a knife-edge pass so tight it made the ground crews take a step back. No pilot they knew could fly like that. Someone gasped as the aircraft executed a vertical corkscrew without losing altitude. Another pilot cursed under his breath. Even Jake stopped talking, his jaw-clenched eyes following the impossible movements in the sky. Sean tried to lift his phone, but his hands weren't steady. The jet looped again, this time rolling full circle at a speed that should have torn the wings off. Then it leveled, flared, and touched down like a feather falling onto glass. The engines cut. The silence was deafening. No one moved as the cockpit canopy lifted with a hiss. From the shadows of the flight deck, a figure rose. She removed the helmet with slow precision. Silver hair caught the morning light. Linda Carter stood tall in the pilot's seat, her face calm, her eyes steady. A dozen jaws dropped. A few officers took a full step backward. No one spoke. Even the ones who had laughed 2 days ago stood frozen like they were staring at something sacred. Jake's face drained of color, a flush rising up his neck as reality closed in. This wasn't just a pilot. This wasn't just a stunt. Linda climbed down like she had done it 1,000 times. Her boots hit the ground and she walked toward the crowd with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The legend hadn't arrived. She had been here the entire time. And now, there was no hiding from it. Subpart 4.2, Full Revelation. Linda stepped in front of the squadron with no uniform, no patches, no insignia. Just a calm presence and the kind of stillness that made people forget to breathe. Her voice was low but firm as she began to speak. Not like she was performing, but like she was telling the truth and had been waiting years for this moment. She introduced herself as Colonel Linda Carter, current lead test pilot for the Ghost Eagle program, a Black Ops initiative so classified it didn't officially exist. She had logged more flight hours in experimental aircraft than the entire squad combined, flown missions over places the government still denied entering, and had been quietly serving as a senior intelligence advisor for over a decade. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few officers exchanged glances like they weren't sure if they should salute or run. Linda reached into her bag and pulled out a slim, sealed tablet. She tapped the screen and nearby monitors flickered to life. One by one, documents appeared. Redacted reports, medals awarded in silence maps with coordinates no one dared say out loud. General Morrison stepped forward through the stunned crowd. Her voice was sharp as she addressed Jake Montgomery. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of command." The words landed like a hammer echoing through the hangar. Jake tried to speak, but the sound that came out wasn't steady. Sean looked like he wanted to disappear. His phone had gone dark and his hand forgotten. The same pilots who had laughed earlier now stood rigid, not from fear, but shame. Their silence said more than any apology could. Linda didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She just kept speaking. She explained that her low profile had been part of a long-running security cover, that her demotion, her silence, even her removal from command briefings had been a test, not of her, but of those around her. She turned and pointed to the aircraft behind her. What you saw today was not about flash. It was about what happens when we stop judging by appearance and start listening to experience. The words hung there quiet, but unshakable. General Morrison walked to Linda's side, nodded once, then addressed the group. What you've witnessed this week is what happens when arrogance meets discipline. What happens when someone forgets that leadership is not inherited, it's earned. Jake looked like a man unraveling. He stared at Linda like he had never seen her before because, in truth, he never had. He had seen what he wanted to see, a woman past her prime, a symbol of a past he wanted to erase. Now that illusion was broken. Linda stood there not as a ghost from another era, but as a reminder of everything the Air Force claimed to value but often forgot: honor, skill, integrity. She had spent years letting others believe she was invisible. Today they saw her, and they would never forget. Part 5. Justice and Renewal. Part 5.1 Judgment Day. The investigation started that same afternoon. Jake and Sean were escorted from the hangar by base security. No handcuffs, no scene, just a quiet walk that felt heavier than steel. No one saluted them as they passed. No one looked them in the eye. The video Sean had proudly filmed was now evidence. Every frame played back in the conference room, projected large on a wall where a review board sat stone-faced. They watched Jake smirk, watched Linda strip her insignia in silence, watched Sean record the whole thing like it was entertainment. Testimonies came in next. Pilots who had kept quiet now stepped forward. One by one, they told stories of being pushed aside, denied opportunities, made to feel like relics. A few choked up. Most kept their voices even. The truth didn't need volume. It just needed air. Linda sat near the back during most of the proceedings. She didn't speak unless asked. She answered every question without embellishment. No anger, no bitterness. Just facts. Her calm was louder than any accusation. Jake tried to defend himself, said he was enforcing standards, said he was modernizing the squadron. But every word crumbled when faced with the record. His pattern was clear, his intent was visible, and his leadership, once protected by his father's reputation, stood exposed for what it really was. Sean didn't say much. His silence said more than his words ever could. He looked smaller each day, shoulders tight, eyes darting anywhere but forward. The swagger he once wore so easily was gone. In its place sat fear and regret. The board issued its findings quickly: abuse of authority, conduct unbecoming, intentional sabotage of personnel evaluations. Jake was stripped of rank, discharged under dishonorable conditions, and referred for federal review. Sean was dismissed as well, with notes of misconduct added to every record tied to his name. As they were escorted out the final time, Linda stood by the hallway window, hands behind her back, eyes on the horizon. Jake glanced at her once, searching for some sign of mercy. She met his gaze just long enough to speak. "You thought I was weak because I didn't shout. I was just choosing when to speak." He didn't respond. He couldn't. The silence that followed was no longer awkward. It was earned. A silence that closed a chapter without slamming it shut. Linda didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. Justice wasn't loud. It was patient. It was steady. And that day, it arrived without raising its voice. Part 5.2 Rebuilding the Culture. The air felt different at Blackridge in the weeks that followed. Memos stopped sounding like threats, and meetings started to feel more like conversations. The squadron that once tiptoed through chain-of-command politics now moved with quiet unity, rebuilding not just rules but trust. Linda never asked for a title, but she was given one anyway: Senior Advisor for Leadership Development. It came with an office she rarely used and a nameplate she never touched. She preferred to be on the ground in the hangars, walking the training fields with her sleeves rolled and her boots dusty. Pilots from every background started showing up early, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Flight simulations included more team-based challenges. Evaluation boards included representatives across rank and age. One of the first changes Linda made was unspoken. She listened more than she talked. And somehow, that made everyone speak more honestly. The new Leadership Academy opened in a converted warehouse on the east side of the base. It wasn't flashy, but it was alive. Chalkboards filled with strategy, tables circled with pilots who had stories instead of resumes. Linda led the sessions once a week. The rest of the time, she simply watched the culture take root. One afternoon, a young second lieutenant named Rosa lingered after a seminar. Her uniform was sharp, but her hands fidgeted as she waited for the room to clear. When she finally spoke, it wasn't with fear, but something softer. "How do you earn respect when you don't fit the mold?" Linda looked at her for a long second, then smiled. "You believe in you first. The rest will follow." Rosa nodded, but it wasn't just polite. It landed. Deep. Like a blueprint someone had been waiting for. The changes weren't instant. Not everyone understood. But the airbase was no longer built on fear. It was built on flight and grit and people who had been overlooked for far too long. Linda didn't lead with rank anymore. She led with presence, and that made all the difference. By the time summer rolled around, Blackridge had become something rare. Not perfect, but better. And for the first time in years, the sky above felt like it belonged to everyone. The crowd gathered early, filling the tarmac with families, cadets, veterans, and schoolchildren waving little flags in the morning light. Stalls lined the runway with cold drinks and sun-faded posters of aircraft past and present. Laughter carried over the speakers between the announcer's voice as jets soared above in tight formation. When Linda Carter's name was called, the cheering didn't sound polite. It sounded personal. Everyone knew what she had been through, and everyone had stayed to see this moment. The Ghost Eagle jet shimmered like liquid steel as it taxied down the runway. Linda sat behind the tinted canopy, calm and steady, her hands on controls few had ever touched. The engine lifted with a deep, smooth growl, and the crowd fell quiet without needing to be told. She rose into the sky in a clean vertical, then rolled into a wide arc that curved with precision over the horizon. No showmanship, no stunts, just mastery. Every turn, every maneuver was purposeful, elegant like music with wings. Children craned their necks. Veterans stood at attention. Young pilots pointed upward with quiet awe. The flight ended with a soft pass over the crowd, low and slow, followed by a final climb that kissed the edge of the clouds before gliding home. When Linda stepped down from the cockpit, she didn't wave. She walked calmly to the waiting crowd, eyes scanning faces like she was looking for someone, maybe no one in particular. Emily stood near the front with her two sons. One of them held up a handmade sign that read, "Grandma flies higher." Later that afternoon, they unveiled the new mural inside the training hangar. It showed Linda standing beside her jet helmet under one-arm sky behind her. Below the painting, carved into brushed steel, were 5 simple words. Excellence knows no age. The crowd stayed quiet for a long moment. No one needed to speak. The message had already landed. And in that silence, something settled. A chapter closed, but not with an ending. With a legacy.